So is it Dr. Keenan? Who's responsible for this?
Senator, Tom Hamilton, Acting Deputy Secretary, Strategic Policy and Intelligence. Defence Industry Policy fits within my group, and Dr. Kiernan is responsible for the particular division that runs industry policy.
So, thank you. So, Dr. Kiernan, you're First Assistant Secretary, Defence Industry Policy.
That's correct.
Thank you. And Mr. Hamilton, you're Acting Deputy Secretary, Strategic Policy and Intelligence.
That's correct.
Thank you. I'm interested in the review. Can I ask, Minister, has the Dr. Vivienne Thom's review been completed yet?
I understand, Senator, it has been completed, yes.
And can you advise me how long does the Minister have following the receipt of the review? I take it the review's now been received by the government?
I believe so.
Senator, yes, that's correct.
And what was the date of the receipt?
19 October.
Thank you.
So what was that date?
19 October.
I see. How long does the Minister have following the receipt of the review before releasing it or tabling it in the Parliament?
It's required to be tabled in both houses within 15 sitting days.
15. And what date will that be then?
I will check that, Senator, and come back to you.
I'm just wondering, will the Minister, does he intend to meet that requirement?
I'm confident the Minister will meet the requirement, Senator.
It is a legislative requirement, is it not?
Yes, it's in the Act, Senator.
That's right. So we can expect to see it. Can you just confirm the date on which 15 sitting days expires? I thought it was 14, by the way, but nonetheless.
Senator, my advice is 15. I will just need to check the number of sitting days.
Can you confirm that it is? Because that might be important. Given how many sitting days remain this year.
Yes, Senator, we'll check that.
And I take it, given that sitting days are different in the House and the Senate, so we're sitting
Senator, we'll look at both houses.
Thank you, if you would please. And how long do you think that would take to be able to provide me with that information?
Senator, I'll look to provide that as soon as I can.
Fairly routine inquiry. I wouldn't have thought it'd take too long. Thank you. And Minister, in the last round estimates when I raised this matter, you indicated to me that submissions would close on the 31st of May. I don't think I've misrepresented you on that.
I don't have the Hansard with me, Senator, but I'm confident you're not misrepresenting me on this occasion.
On this occasion.
Important caveat.
On this occasion.
Important caveat.
It's very generous of you, Minister. I'm just wondering, the Defence Department made a submission on the 8th of June. That's the date on which I have the... That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct.
Why was it... why did the department make a late submission?
The department was undertaking consultations. The consultations were quite broad, both within the department and in the broader whole of government. It was taking longer, so we engaged Dr. Thom and requested an extension, and Dr. Thom granted that.
I see. Thank you. So, who approved the final form of the submission itself?
That was the assistant, the former of Tom Hamilton, Scott Dewar.
That was the former Acting Deputy Secretary in my position, Senator.
Sorry, can you tell me who that was?
That's Mr. Scott Dewar.
Mr. Scott Dewar. And he's the person who signed off on that.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. You indicated that there'd been consultations about that submission. Who with?
There were consultations both internally and externally in the department. Internally it was with the Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group and with Defence Science and Technology Group. External, it was from memory, and I'll probably just have to confirm for you, Department of Home Affairs and Prime Minister and Cabinet, Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Australian Research Council, and Department of Industry. I think that's all, but I'll just confirm.
Now, you say within the department itself, you consulted with capabilities and with the Defence Science. Were there any indications within those groups that there might be a problem with the submission?
No, there wasn't a problem with the submission. The submission had whole of defence agreement to it.
Oh, whole of defence agreement. Because I'm surprised by that, because in the previous estimates I actually indicated to you that I'd actually asked a few of the agencies about the operations of the Act, and that the ARC, for instance, had indicated that there'd been no breaches of the Act, and in fact on a question on notice the Defence Department itself acknowledges question number, I think it was question number 18. Defence acknowledged that there'd been no incidents of non-compliance with the Defence Trade Control Act by universities or research organisations. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How does that fit with the assertions made in the submission then?
Senator, as you pointed out, and as the officers have said, that we've had very good cooperation in terms of the operations of the Act. Dr. Tom's review was to consider whether the Act is appropriate for Australia's current and future national security challenges. So I think that our submission and the work of the agencies, as you would understand, needs to look at the rapidly evolving international and national security context in which the Act is operating, and it's appropriate, while we acknowledge very good cooperation with the institutions at the moment, to see whether it is appropriate for our current and future needs.
Mr Moriarty, I understand the point you make, the distinction you make, but this submission is in fact misleading, because it says there's a high level of compliance. It's not just a high level, there's been no breaches. It's not quite the same as high level, is it? The submission makes a statement which is misleading. The Minister for Defence at the time made a statement to this committee and the last hearings consistent with that. And the Defence Department subsequently put a submission to the inquiry which was inconsistent with what the Minister had actually said and inconsistent with the position that had been put to this Parliament as December of last year, in regard to the operations of the current Act. Now, I'm just wondering how do you reconcile that inconsistency, given your assertion that there'd been widespread consultation? Obviously not with the Minister, obviously not with the ARC, despite what you've just said, because they gave quite specifically and contrary evidence to this Parliament, which you didn't seem to know about at the last round of estimates, because you had to take the questions on notice, but subsequently confirmed that evidence.
It being 10:30 and there being no question...
Perhaps you could come back with an answer,
Yep.
because I've got a few more questions to pursue on this question.
Yep, we'll resume at 10:45. Thank you. To order and call Senator Carr
Thank you
in
very much.
continuation.
So perhaps I could get some, have you been able to find out what the day was on which the legislative requirement is for the report to come back to Parliament?
Senator, we've confirmed 15 days, but we are checking. We want to make sure we get it right, what that means in terms of dates for tabling.
But my understanding is that this year.
We will check and confirm
Thank you
for
very
you.
much.
We want to get that
Now,
right.
so I was going to the question of the consultation, given the contradictory nature of the submission with what the evidence was before this committee, other parliamentary committees, the statements made by the minister. How do you reconcile that?
Senator, I'm very comfortable with the language that the department used, that there had been a high degree of compliance. For the benefit of the committee, there had been 3 instances of non-compliance, so it is not correct to say that
So you want to correct your evidence? You want to correct your evidence? Is that what you're telling me now?
Senator, what I'm saying, Senator, is that the latest information that I have been given is that there have been 3 instances of possible non-compliance.
Yes. Perhaps you could detail those, because this is a correction of the evidence as presented to this committee, and as late as the estimates, question number 21.
Yeah. Senator, no, I don't wish to correct the record. The answer that the department provided was that Defence has not identified any incidents of non-compliance with the Defence Trade Controls Act by universities or research organisations.
I see. All right, so what's the clarification you'd like to make?
That there have been 3 instances or issues of non-compliance that are being investigated. I'm prepared to say, but the answer, I think, is self-evident, that those are not by universities or research organisations.
I see. Because you've issued, what is it, how many licences? 130, was it?
So how many licences?
Yeah. You've issued how many permits for exports of controlled goods and technologies?
Senator, more than 160 permits for exports of controlled goods and technology.
All right. So that's the current position. You made how many assessments?
200 assessments.
Right. So that's another update on the figures.
Yes, we continue to make assessments as universities.
No, there's 200 assessments was the last evidence you gave me, and that's the evidence that you presented as of last December. And you're saying 100 and repeat the number.
More than
How many
160
permits?
and more than 200.
And 160, okay. And that's to 20 different organisations, is that correct?
Correct.
That's universities and research agencies.
Yes.
Right. And in those assessments, you've found 3 from non-universities and non-research agencies that you thought might be breaches.
Sorry, Senator, let me be very clear. Those numbers that were provided for over 20 different research organisations and universities, and the more than 200 assessments and more than 160 permits are in relation to universities and research institutions.
Let's see.
So there are, of course, other applications, assessments and permits outside of those entities.
And the Act, therefore, you say, needs to be broadened, and on the basis of the submissions that have been subsequently made through the Academy of Science, the Academy of Technology and Engineering, the Australian National University, University of Adelaide, the University of New South Wales, the University of South Australia, the University of Southern Queensland, the University of Sydney, the Association of Medical Research Institutes, the Group of 8, the University of Queensland University of Technology, Science and Technology Australia, Universities Australia, University of Technology Sydney, the Australian Research Management Society, University of Wollongong, University of Melbourne, Northrop, Saab and Gold, all of which are making the point that the Defence Department, in their submission, their late submission, was in fact seeking an overreach in terms of its powers.
Senator, we're aware of the views of those organisations you mentioned that were made to an independent review. I would make the point that in implementing the current Act, we have a very good relationship with those institutions. All the advice I have is that we work very collaboratively with them in implementing the current Act. As it was an independent review, we thought it important that Defence place on the record our views about how strategic circumstances have changed since the Act and put some ideas to the independent reviewer in relation to how we thought the next version of the Act could be adjusted.
Yes.
That was the basis for our submission. We are aware of the views put by other organisations. I can tell you that whatever the government decides to do and whatever Act is passed, we will continue to work very closely with those institutions in implementing new legislation, should new legislation be brought forward.
You specifically say that you need to have this, what is described by the research organisations I've referred to, as a significant departure from the current system would develop and agreed through a process of comprehensive consultation with the sector. For instance, the Academy of Science describes it as a unilateral ability to prohibit, control or regulate any technology, irrespective of the status or listed technology on the defence, in terms of the defence security and so on, and the ability to suppress publication of any given research activity. And such a regime would create an enormous uncertainty with no ability to determine whether a technology would be allowed to be developed, deployed, communicated or exploited or exported. The similar sentiments are expressed by the Universities Australia. You're saying that the circumstances have changed to the extent to justify the Defence Department repudiating, let's say for instance University of Australia, repudiating a compromise position struck by the steering group in 2015?
Senator, what I'm saying is that we are responsible for national security. We are very concerned at some of the developments in our strategic environment, and it is critical for us that we have a healthy and secure research and development sector that's vital to Australian Defence Force capabilities. That is why we thought it important to put our views into the independent review. I can tell you that in responding to that independent review, we will work with the universities on our response, but our position, where we're coming from, is the importance of protecting Australian technology and maintaining the Australian Defence Force's capability edge.
Yes, I understand that that's your claim. You're saying the proposed, and the Universities of Australia describe it, for instance, coupled with other proposals, provides the regulator with the ability to arbitrarily decide to control, to supply, export and publication of any technology, whether specified by the DSGL or not, and to enter premises almost immediately to ensure its decision. And such extensive powers are incompatible with the free conduct of research and inquiry and threaten the ability of universities to carry out research in the public interest. The Defence Department is seeking extraordinary powers in terms of the way in which this country operates. And you say there was widespread consultation about such a submission?
I'm saying there'll be widespread consultation in relation to the response to the submission.
No, not in response. I'm saying in terms of the submission itself. For instance, can you tell me this? The Defence Export Controls Working Group, when did it last meet?
I will have to check the last meeting of that.
Well, I'm told it's 22nd of February 2018. Is that correct?
That was at the time of last estimates.
Yes. Is it met?
I'm taking that on notice.
Thank you. Was the Defence Export Controls Working Group consulted about this submission?
I have explained the consultation process.
Yes, I
that was
didn't hear them
undertaken.
on your list of groups.
No,
Why not?
because we undertook consultation through just engagement with the departments that I have run through already.
Okay. So tell me, what does the Defence Export Controls Working Group actually do?
I will get some detail of that, so I'll take that on notice. They look at export control issues.
Isn't that the group that actually does the liaison about the operations of the Act?
We had developed the submission, so it was distributed around to the agencies that I have run through as our consultation process. I would note that the submission was a defence portfolio submission, so it was a submission from a defence perspective.
Yes, but it happened to involve the operations of our entire research community, for which you agree there has been no breaches involving that research community. Our universities or research agencies, throughout the operations of this Act, but you didn't consult the group that's permanently in station to actually liaise with the Defence Department.
I would note that the submission that we made talked about that we would have to do quite extensive consultation with affected groups, subject to the views of the independent reviewer and what the independent reviewer will be putting to government and government decisions. So reinforcing Mr Hamilton's comments, we're very committed to working with and engaging with the university
I'm sure you
sector.
are. I can see that because you spoke to them before you put the submission in. You work with them after decisions are made. Is that what you're telling this committee?
Defence undertakes extensive engagement with the university sectors. We have extremely good relationships. We have undertaken quite a lot of outreach activities.
I can see that's all past tense. Doctor, that's all past tense. It's got nothing to do with this submission, which is seeking the most extraordinary overreach in terms of the powers of the Defence Department to enter premises, to seize materials, to prohibit research, and the fundamental principles in terms of our international engagements is to get that balance right, which is what the Minister, the Defence Minister at the time said to us was the purpose of this review, to make sure that balance was correct. And you immediately subverted that by putting this submission to the review without talking to the people who are directly affected. Is that correct?
No, we would not accept that characterisation,
All right.
Senator.
All right, well, let's just look at then. What's the additional resources required if the Defence Department was actually granted these far-reaching powers?
I would note that this is an independent review and it is yet to be determined what the outcome of the independent review is.
I understand that, but you must have had an assessment, given that you've asked for these powers, what it would cost the Commonwealth to actually grant you these powers.
So Defence already undertakes a monitoring function in this space.
But nowhere near what you're asking for.
Again, our submission did actually acknowledge that that this would be an administratively burdensome on the scale that has been described
Yes.
in some of the other submissions.
Yes.
This is actually about very specific technologies that may be of application to ADF capabilities.
Yes.
So it's not about all technologies.
I'm sorry, Doctor, that's not what the submission actually says.
No, but Senator, surely judgment would be exercised about what technologies might come to our attention. I mean, we would as we engage with the university sector across so many areas of cooperation, there are, from time to time, technologies that we understand are of particular interest for military applications or broader security applications. We are certainly not seeking a role for the department in an intrusive, across-the-board, deeply inappropriate involvement in the work of universities and researchers. But there are some areas where we are concerned about the possibility of those technologies being used or not being harnessed effectively for the capability edge of the Australian Defence Force. But, Senator, I don't accept that we would seek a massive increase in resources so that we could go and interfere or engage in across a whole range of faculties, across a whole range of institutions. I mean, there would be judgment exercised. That would often be based on discussions with other agencies about what particular technologies we were concerned about, what evidence there was of potentially emerging challenges. That that is how we work with the universities now. We would seek, of course, to have a cooperative and mutually respectful relationship with all of those institutions, and I don't think it's correct to say that we would need a huge increase in resources because we would be seeking some blanket right to enter any faculty at any time
Thank you,
on
Mr.
any
Morrow.
campus.
It would appear that you're now repudiating your own department submission. Now, but perhaps you could clarify one thing for me. What exactly is it that you say is the new threats that need to be considered? To make some assertions here, the new challenges and issues have risen in the national security environment over the past 2 years. Can you specify what they are?
Senator, I'm not going to go through a list of specific technologies. The white paper released in 2016 said that one of the biggest challenges that we face in our environment is the pace of technological change. Technologies are changing faster than we had previously anticipated. New technologies are coming online. They have defence applications. Some of them have potentially dual-use applications in relation to weapons of mass destruction. We have no interest in overburdening the universities, but I come back to the point that
And they're currently covered. That's all currently covered by the current law.
In our view, it is important to take the opportunity of an independent review to make sure that the protections for those technologies that we rely on to fight and win future wars are adequately protected. That is what we've taken the opportunity to do with an independent review. The reviewer will draw her own conclusions, and we will work very closely with the universities in formulating a response to how we take forward, making sure that the technologies that they develop are protected for them and for us.
So it says here, in order to effectively protect certain technologies assessed as important to security and defence capability, the Australian government needs the ability to regulate access and transfer of military, dual-use and sensitive technology where the recipient's intentions may be prejudicial to the interest of Australia and its allies. Now, what's wrong with that in regard to the current operations?
I think the submission stated our concerns that we do not have the ability to prevent the transfer of technology to a foreign entity where there's reason to believe that that technology transfer would be prejudicial to Australia's national interests.
Okay, so then you say either way that a government should have the ability to determine whether access to such technologies by foreign entities is in the national interest. The Defence Department should be taken on trust. Is that what you're saying?
It's one of our core responsibilities to make sure that we assess technology, to make sure that it is used for the benefit of Australia, and to make sure that Australian technology does not fall into the hands of other countries.
And so the current regime doesn't provide you with that power?
As I said, Senator, an independent review is an opportunity to assess whether additional protections are required given the pace of technological change and given developments in the research sector.
Well, I'm just, in the current arrangements with the universities' research agencies are, on the evidence, given that there have been no breaches, are working well.
The current arrangements are working well. As I said, we have a very constructive relationship with universities in implementation of the current Act.
Are you surprised by the reaction of the universities and the research agencies to your submission?
I would not characterise my reaction that way.
So how would you describe their reaction?
I read them closely to make sure that I understood the position and concerns of the entities that put in submissions.
Sorry, what does that mean?
It means I paid close attention to the views of the other institutions that put in recommendations and submissions to an independent review.
And they reacted quite strongly to you.
Yes, it was a strong reaction.
Yes, and you were given an opportunity to make a further supplementary submission to repudiate those assertions. Why didn't you take that up?
My view is this is an independent review by a very eminent individual who would balance the views of all those other entities. We will consider the independent reviewer's recommendations and take them forward.
So who made the decision not to make a further supplementary submission in response to the overwhelming rejection of the Defence Department's bid for increasing powers in this area? You were invited to make a further supplementary submission, were you not?
We decided that we were very comfortable with the first submission and that a second submission from Defence would not have changed the position that we put in on the first submission.
So you stand by what you say?
We
Is
did.
that the proposition? Stand by what you say,
Yes.
and you don't regard it as a mistake to have actually made that submission?
No.
I see. Thank you. Tell me, there was in fact a breach that I'm aware of that you haven't seemed to have picked up, and that's the one with the CSIRO and Pakistan.
The one that was discussed at the last estimates.
With Pakistan.
So that related to it didn't actually relate to the legislation that we're talking about today.
It did.
That related to the customs.
No, actually, I think you'll find it was to this legislation, but in very early days. How many of these events have actually related to China, which seems to be the centre of this interest here?
We'll take that notice on question on notice, Senator, and get a response to you as soon as we can.
Because I'm told that the only area in which there had been a concern was with Pakistan. Is that correct?
Senator, the Act relates to international obligations in relation to a range of technologies and international regimes. They're not country-specific. As I said, we'll take that on notice.
All right. Well, look, since you don't regard this submission as a mistake and you stand by it, what assessment has been made in terms of the consequences of adopting these powers in terms of the effect on investment, in terms of these intrusive regulatory capacities of the Defence Department in regard to universities and research agencies?
Senator, we'll obviously consider implications for maintaining a healthy research sector in responding to the review's recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll leave it there.